we haven't heard from Terry Pegula. We don't hear from Terry Pegula, so we can't pretend to know his thinking. But based on what went down on Monday with Sean McDermott being fired and Brandon Beane not only holding on to his job but also being promoted, it would seem that Brandon Beane has the ear of the owner. Now, I will say that overwhelmingly the reaction that I have seen on social media when I haven't been busy writing and reporting on this is that they fired the wrong guy.
It's time now for Nuff Said with Bob Koshinski. Brought to you by Chef's Famous Italian Restaurant, home of the famous spaghetti parm, and WEC Radio, the Big WEC, home of the oldies. Bob's guest on this episode is Buffalo Bills beat reporter Jay Skurski.
Welcome, everybody, to Nuff Said with yours truly, Bob Koshinski. And wow, this is going to be a special podcast. And before I get into why we're here, we all know why we're here. We're here every week, but we're here at the famous Chef's Italian Restaurant. And besides the great food you get here at Chef's, I want to plug, they've got a big meat raffle for the Louis J. Billatier Foundation, February 1st. Information all on the screen. It's a great night, great food, and it's a great cause. Also want to give a shout out to the Big WEC Radio, home of the oldies. That's what I listen to. But we have right here Jay Skurski, my nice Polish friend. Jay, I want to thank you for coming out late notice. We all know what's happened. The Buffalo Bills have let Coach Sean McDermott shock. He was fired after 9 seasons. Great record. A lot of wins in postseason, a lot of losses in postseason. So I take it, we talked briefly before we started, big surprise to everyone.
Yeah, I think it sent shockwaves through the NFL on Monday when it came down. Certainly, I think there are reasons for it, which we'll certainly get into, but even despite those, I think it was still a surprise. You can look at the way that Saturday's game ended. You can look at the playoff history, but nevertheless, I would start by saying this, and I know that this doesn't, relate to the results on the field. Sean McDermott was and is a very good man. He's a good football coach, but he, I think more than any coach, really since Marv Levy, and I am too young to have covered Marv Levy, but he related to Buffalo. He really became a Western New Yorker, a Buffalonian, and wanted nothing more than to deliver a Super Bowl to the people here. More than he wanted it really for himself or even for his team, he wanted it for the people here. And I can tell you, having spent a lot of time with Sean McDermott, having a lot of conversations with him on the record, off the record, how important that was to him. And so I think the reaction to the news, and again, this is another topic that we can get into, but the reaction to the news that I saw yesterday was a lot of sadness, a lot of disappointment for him. And I think that was true on both sides. There was a camp who thought that he should be fired, who thought he should have been fired after the famous, or I guess infamous 13 seconds game. There was a camp that thought, he has taken this team as far as he could go. And there may be some truth in that, and there may be some justifications for that. But I think even those people yesterday took a step back and really felt for him. And I think Sean McDermott is going to be fine. He's going to land on his feet. I think he might end up being a head coach as soon as next season again in the NFL. But that doesn't take away from the level of disappointment, the level of sadness that I think a lot of people felt yesterday for a guy who really cared about this place.
Well, you look at, and you can create your own saying, but, if you don't know your history, you often repeat it. And when he got hired, he reported directly to Pegula, and Russ Brandon was involved with hiring McDermott.
Yep.
And Russ Brandon, I believe, was president of the team, but he really didn't control football operations in a sense. I won't go into the whole Russ Brandon story. Russ wanted to be a football guy, but that really wasn't his upbringing. It was marketing, but he was hired, and I'm sure McDermott took the job because he was reporting directly to the owner. He didn't have to worry about who the guys were in the front office. And I'm sure he helped bring in Beane from Carolina because that's where they both came from. And I know, I know this story because Sean told me this himself. When they were in Carolina, Brandon Beane's son was young at the time, probably 6, 7 years old. He was getting into youth wrestling, and they would bring him over to Sean's house in the basement, and Sean would show him wrestling moves. Now, you know as a father, and I know as a father, you're not doing that unless you like the guy and you're buddies with the guy, right? You're not bringing your son to somebody's house to show wrestling moves unless you're friends with the guy. So I knew they were friends. Terry Pagula tried to kind of downplay that when they hired Beane to make it look like McDermott wasn't necessarily driving the boat on that. But I really felt like these guys were close enough. This is who McDermott wanted in there as general manager. So they were friends. They were close. They both reported directly to the owner. If you've been around big business at all, after 9 years, somebody's looking to get the ear of the owner, and try to jostle for position, because I would guess both were pointing fingers in the opposite direction.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. When you have a setup like that, it's pretty easy to say, hey, it's not my problem, it's this guy's problem, right? He's the one that gave me this roster, right, that I can't win with. Or Beane is looking at it and saying, I've delivered Josh Allen to him, and I've delivered a championship level roster to him, and it's coaching that's holding it back. And we haven't heard from Terry Pagula. We don't hear from Terry Pagula, so we can't pretend to know his thinking. But based on what went down on Monday with Sean McDermott being fired and Brandon Beane not only holding on to his job but also being promoted, it would seem that Brandon Beane has the ear of the owner. Now, I will say that overwhelmingly the reaction that I have seen on social media when I haven't been busy writing and reporting on this is that they fired the wrong guy. That has been the feedback that I've gotten on articles that I've written or just have seen. And I think Brandon Beane has a lot of questions to answer for, really dating back to a couple days after the draft when he gave that now infamous radio rant about wide receiver and not necessarily having a need at the position, and then literally the next day signing Elijah Moore, which would indicate that they weren't as set as maybe he was saying. I think there has been a massive sea change in the way of Brandon Beane's approval rating amongst fans. A few years ago, I think, they were looking at it and saying, we don't have the right head coach to get us there. The general manager has given him the tools. Now, what is, I would say, I guess, ironic about this decision now is that most people that I've talked to believe that this might have been Sean McDermott's finest hour as Bills coach, with the talent that he had available to him, with the injuries that they endured throughout this season. For him to get them into the postseason, to finally win a game on the road in the postseason, something they had not done under Sean McDermott and under Josh Allen since they both got here, and then to lose the way that they did in Denver, it's hard to put a lot of that on coaching. I mean, Sean McDermott didn't tell Josh Allen to go throw or turn the ball over 4 times, and James Cook to lose a fumble in Denver territory when the Bills are leading 7-3 and driving toward a 2-score lead potentially at that point in the game. So it's hard to blame this loss in particular on coaching. It's his best players who let him down, and that to me I think leads into the idea that Brandon Beane, as I said before, has a lot to answer for in terms of the way that this roster was constructed. He told me after the trade deadline, I asked him, do you believe that you have a championship roster? And he said that he did. Sean McDermott was asked a couple days later whether he believed that, and his answer was very telling in what he didn't say. He said, I love this team. He didn't say yes. He said, I love this team. And there are other examples throughout this year. You can look at the decision for the Raiders to trade Jacoby Myers to the Jaguars, and twice, without being asked about Jacoby Myers, Sean McDermott brings that up before the Bills play the Jaguars in the playoffs. It certainly felt like the Darius Slay situation and losing Jamarcus Ingram, that there was some friction and there were some disagreements, I guess we could call them, between the head coach and the general manager. And as you said, Bob, 9 years together, I think it's inevitable that those start to arise, especially when the team has had as many disappointments as it has.
Well, the Slay incident really was telling because I'm sure McDermott felt like somebody should have talked to this guy before you picked him up to see if he was willing to come to Buffalo before we released Ingram, who was immediately picked up by Houston.
Yeah.
And so now in the first of all, in the last game of the season, they've got their number 1 draft pick out there playing in a totally meaningless game, gets injured, lost for the playoffs. They actually had to put Trey White out there as a backup, which if they had lost him as well, you saw what happened in the game against Denver. The minute Sean Payton saw that there was a backup,
right at him.
He knew who the roster was, who these guys were. You're right, they went right at him. And it's maddening when one thing about McDermott's defense, if it's 3rd and long, he's fallen back into a soft zone, and often the other team has managed to pick up the first down. We've seen that for a long time with the way his system is set up. Is it the players who play the zone? Who's to say? But it happened in that game a number of times, happened in overtime on their last drive. So anyway.
I would just add there that it's hard to make the case that this was a championship roster. I don't know of anyone outside of this organization who doesn't have Zuba's blinders on, who could believe that they have a championship roster. You're playing Dane Jackson and Darnell Savage in key moments of the divisional round of the playoffs. You're throwing deep balls to Brandon Cooks, who wasn't on the team in week 11 or week 12. You are, relying on a wide receiver group that beyond Khalil Shakir is not NFL caliber, is not NFL quality. And again, these are all things that we will ask Brandon Beane about when we hear from him in his end-of-season news conference, which should be coming up very soon. But there are several instances where you can look at and say they did not have what they needed at these positions. And it's not enough to just blame injuries because, to your point, yeah, Maxwell Hairston was injured, but why was he injured? Why was he in the game in the first place?
Right. They weren't prepared. They didn't have enough depth at the position.
Correct.
Okay, so if they rule that the Cooks catch was a catch and not an interception, and they kick the field goal, and they're going to the AFC Championship game, and whatever happens after that, do you think at the end of the season, minus winning the Super Bowl, that they were still going to make this change?
No, I don't. I mean, I think if they had gotten to the Super Bowl, it would be remarkably difficult to fire your coach after making a Super Bowl appearance. I would say I wouldn't do it even if with an AFC Championship game appearance, especially considering, again, the depth of the roster. To drag a team to the AFC title game with that many injuries and then to fire Sean McDermott, I'm surprised they did it now. I would have been surprised times 2 if they did it after an AFC Championship game appearance.
I think it didn't help McDermott that Vrabel shows up in New England and takes a team that had won 4 games and completely flipped the switch.
Not just Vrabel. I mean, let's look out in Seattle at what's going on there, right? They hire a new coach. They've got Sam Darnold at quarterback, who has been sort of a journeyman, honestly, in his career. He's had some success here the last couple of years, but there are teams that have won it all, Seattle and New England being good examples of that in recent history, who have not necessarily bottomed out, but have had lean years and who now find themselves again on the cusp of the Super Bowl, while the Bills have not gotten there through this extended run of success. That can't be easy for Terry Pegula to watch and to see.
So you mentioned Seattle. I have a source telling me that their man is going to be Clint Kubiak, the offensive coordinator. That's what I'm told. We'll see what happens. He's still got a game coming up this weekend. If they win that game, which I think right now there's a shot, they have a decent chance of doing, they're going to the Super Bowl. So when they actually have a chance to talk to him is up in the air. They can't talk to him until...
Not until they lose. So if he would have to lose this game, then they could interview him. Or if he wins, they cannot talk to him until after the Super Bowl.
And I guess to touch something that people might be wondering, so McDermott is let go. I assume his entire staff is going to be let go.
That will be, so I did some reporting on that yesterday. That will be up to, the new coach will have a say in that. Those staff members are still under contract. Now, if they were to leave in the case of Joe Brady for a promotion to head coach, the Bills could not prevent that from happening. Brady has had multiple head coaching interviews, including a second interview with Baltimore coming up. When you get to that second interview stage, we've seen that is usually when a team makes its decision. So you would have to consider Brady at least a finalist for the Ravens job. But the rest of the assistants, so whether that be Bobby Babich, Chris Tabor, the special teams coordinator, they are still under contract to the Bills, and I would expect that the new head coach will have a very big say in building his own staff. So some of them could be back.
Before I forget, so explain the story. They're on the team's on the plane on the way back from Denver. McDermott reached out to you on the plane?
Yes. So it was I'll give you the backstory. So McDermott did his post-game news conference, as is customary after the loss. The team then, finishes packing up, takes the bus to the charter flight. I got a text from the Bills' vice president of communications that Sean McDermott, when he arrived at the airport, had more that he wanted to say regarding the play. He had been able to fully review it. He had also been able to read the pool report from referee Carl Cheffers, his explanation of the play. And McDermott had more that he would like to say publicly on the record. Could he give me a call? I said, of course. I don't know if he was in the airport, if he was actually on board the plane when he called, but it was from the airport, let's say.
You're not on the team. You're not on the team.
No,
plane.
I'm in the press box
right.
in Mile High, still writing. That's a popular misconception, I think, from a lot of fans. Reporters do not travel with the team. We make our own arrangements. So I was going back later that evening on my own. So Sean McDermott called me from the airport, from the plane. Really doesn't matter. While I was in the press box, I conducted about a 10-minute interview with him. He went on the record with several other thoughts regarding that play. He was adamant that it was a catch by Brandon Cooks based on his understanding of the rule. There has been a healthy amount of debate over the last couple of days that has sort of subsided now that the team has made the move to move on from McDermott. But before that, prior to that, there was a healthy amount of debate as to whether or not it was a catch. I have my opinions on it. I think certainly it was a very impactful play in the game, obviously. If Brandon Cooks makes that catch, the Bills are in position for a potential game-winning field goal from inside 40 yards. There's a very good chance that we're not having this conversation right now, and we're talking about getting ready for the Patriots in the AFC Championship game.
Would you care to share your opinion on the play?
I believed it was a catch. I thought that he had there are three elements to a catch, right? Secure the football, 2 feet down or a knee, and then make what is considered a football move. That is where the gray area, I think, on this play comes in. Certainly, I thought that Brandon Cooks secured the ball with 2 hands. His knee touched down. The question becomes, did he make a football move? In my mind, as he's going to the ground, he is pulling the ball into his body in an effort to further secure it. I guess the definition of a football move then becomes a little bit gray, because the next night, as fate would have it, Davante Adams makes a catch, 2 feet down, hit immediately, knee touches down. They rule that because he's moving forward, he made a football move, and it was ruled a catch and not an interception because, again, the ball was ripped away from him, never touched the ground, ended up with a Chicago player. I have a hard time squaring those two. I think if you were to look at those two plays, the definition of a football move, what Adams did versus what Cooks did, Cooks is on the ground. That is the difference. I don't know. I don't see it there based on the way that the rule is written to say that wasn't a catch. I think there are more examples of that play being ruled a catch than there are interceptions in this league.
I agree with McDermott in that I thought that was a play they should have definitely taken their time to look at because it was a game-changing play.
And that was his initial complaint
right
after the game, is that why are we going so fast here? He even went as far as to use the timeout in that situation to hope that they would review it a little bit further.
And if you look at Cooks, since he's been with the team, he's had trouble securing catches. There was a catch in Philadelphia, which he ended up against Philadelphia and Buffalo, but he made a great long catch, long pass catch. And the ball was all over, and the ball was ended on his thigh, but he managed to finally pull it in. So the fact that he was, the ball got ripped right out of his hands, but he'd hit the ground. My sense was if it had been called a catch, it would have been a catch. Yeah. I don't think they would have reversed it if the official on the play had made a call. But one of my favorite all-time sayings is, if and buts were candy and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. And we can gnash our teeth on that one, just like we can gnash our teeth over 13 seconds, no goal. I mean, all these, wide right, all these horrible plays that always pop up in the history of being a Buffalo sports fan. But the game's over, and the fact that they now are going to bring in a new coach does take away a lot of the steam over, wringing your hands over that play, because there's going to be a new man in town. There's going to be an extremely high amount of pressure on Brandon Beane, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on this brand new coach, because he's inheriting a team that is literally a play away from maybe going to the Super Bowl. And if he goes backwards, there's going to be a lot of people wondering, like, why did you make this move, right?
I think walking into this job, it obviously has its advantages in the sense of you have potentially the best player on the planet in Josh Allen at quarterback, and that sets you up to win a lot of games. To your point, though, Bob, and it's different this year because there are 10 openings, right? 10 head coach openings is a really, really big number. Excuse me. And when you look at the Ravens is a very similar opening in my mind, right? A very established franchise. You've got rock steady leadership at the top of that team. You have a franchise quarterback in Lamar Jackson. They decided they needed a change. The Steelers, a little bit different, although you did have, you know that you have steady leadership. Three head coaches since 1967 there in Pittsburgh or something like that. So that's a bit of an unusual opening too. But this Bills opening, to me, what makes it, I would say, what would give me maybe even a little bit of pause as a coach is the expectation from day one is that you win a Super Bowl. And ideally you do it next year. Talk about a lot of pressure.
Exactly.
I mean, this is not being hired by the Arizona Cardinals where you say, all right, well, we're going to start over at quarterback and we're going to spend a couple of years building things up. And I'm going to have probably 3 years here. As long as I don't completely, fall on my face in the first 2 years, I'll probably get 3 years. You're not getting 3 years in Buffalo. You're getting 1 year. And the expectation is you better go win the Super Bowl. And if you don't, why did we fire Sean McDermott, right?
Exactly.
That is a really tough position for any head coach to be in. And on top of that, as you mentioned earlier, the promotion from Beane to put him in charge of the entire football operation now presents a really interesting dynamic for me. Is an established coach going to want to deal with that? He's going to want direct access to the owner, I would think. So does that limit your candidate pool where you may be having to hire a first-time head coach or a younger head coach? Now, they may have gone that direction anyway, and it might not ultimately matter, but I'll throw the name Mike Tomlin out there. I'm not saying that Mike Tomlin is a candidate for this job, that he even wants to coach anywhere in 2026. But would Mike Tomlin really want to report to Brandon Beane? I honestly don't know the answer to that, and I think it's a fair question to ask. So it's a different leadership structure, one that I have some questions and reservations about. That isn't my big concern, though. My big concern is if you don't win a Super Bowl in year one, you're going to be looked at as a failure. And how does a coach deal with that kind of pressure? That will be my first question to whoever it is hired, is that from day one you're going to be expected to win a Super Bowl. That is usually not the case with new head coach hires in the NFL.
Yeah, I think that basically, and so much in pro sports and in life deals with relationships. So who Brandon Beane has in his past, or where he's crossed paths with somebody who's either an up-and-comer or an existing coach. I could see a coach who's lost a job willing to accept this relationship, this situation, because he wants to get back in. I can also see a young coach who really wants that first NFL head coaching job, be interested. But like you said, the pressure, because you don't want to be one and done, right? You want to get a good situation so you have a chance to really show what you can do. So
I don't think that it's going to severely limit their pool of candidates. I mean, it is still Josh Allen, right? And you're coming to a rabid fan base. You're opening a new stadium. It's a franchise that has had a sustained run of success that we shouldn't forget. 6 years in a row to make the divisional round of the playoffs is an accomplishment. I know it's not fans' ultimate goal. It's not the team's ultimate goal, and there is a level of disappointment that comes with not being able to go beyond that, much beyond that. Only 2 AFC championship games in that time. But there is a lot of positives to this job. But the one thing that it comes with, along with those positives, is an immense amount of pressure. One thing that's good about the job is that Josh Allen is not a jerk.
So he's one of the best players, if not the best player in the league, and he seems to be very coachable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Allen is a coach's dream.
Right.
And that said, how quickly can this new coach establish a relationship with Allen if he doesn't have one before? Because let's point out, there are candidates out there, Brian Daboll, Davis Webb being probably the two primary that have been floated who do have a relationship with Josh Allen. So potentially, and Joe Brady, the in-house candidate, obviously has a relationship with him too. So Allen's role in this, and I will real quickly point out, usually Josh Allen talks to us the day after the season ends on Locker Cleanout Day.
Yeah.
In hindsight, the fact that he did not maybe should have set off a couple more alarms than it did. It was told to us by the Bills' PR staff that Allen had requested a couple of days to decompress after what was a tough loss. If anyone saw him at his post-game news conference, they know that he took that loss harder than any he has in his career. I think the media was respectful of that request, understood it based on what he had gone through the day before. Did he know something, though? Again, that's another question that we'll have for him.
The question, what did he know and when did he know it?
Exactly.
I want to thank you again, Jay Skurski from the Buffalo News, for coming out on short notice and doing this with us. And I know you got a busy week ahead.
No, it is. It is a busy week. Can't say for sure that, as we said before we started here, that I knew that we'd be covering a coaching search, but here we are, and we'll do our best at the Buffalo News to stay on top of every detail.
Jay Skurski, Buffalo News, want to thank you for coming out. Again, a shout out to Chef's Famous Italian Restaurant. They got a big meat raffle coming up February 1st. Check all the details on your screen. And of course, the Big Weck. The Big Weck. I love those oldies. Going to listen to them till the day I die. We'll be back next week. Our guest next week, barring any major catastrophic NFL changes, will be Tyler Dunn from the Go Long podcast. So that's coming up next week. Until then, have yourselves a great night and a much better tomorrow.